Go get comfortable. This will be going soon, then you'll have a nice warm spot. Yeah, nice warm cozy spot. Well, good morning, friends. Feels like a good day to build a lumber rack. What do you think? Good? Yeah? Shall we? Okay, let's go. Alright, well apparently, no matter how many takes I do, Finn is determined that he's going to be in this next part. So, before we start putting this stuff together, we want to check how true our floor is. Now, it doesn't have to be level. It can be a little off the bubble and it'll be fine. Your lumber won't care. But it does have to be even. I would be concerned about anything that is 3/16 of an inch or greater in deviation. The reason this matters is that we're going to pre-assemble each set of bunks and then they're going to sit on the floor. And if one is higher or lower than the rest, it's going to carry either no load or much more than its fair share of the load. And that's going to produce a much weaker overall lumber rack. These bunks really need to work together. Pretty simple, right? Kind of goes without saying, but I thought I'd mention it. So anything more than 3/16 of an inch of deviation overall over the rack of your bunks, I would then not pre-assemble. I would assemble on the wall. So in my cabinet shop, that's what I had to do. I had over 1/2 inch deviation over 8 feet in the concrete floor. So in that case, what I did is I placed each beam on the wall, and then I used a laser level, but you could just use a long board and a level, and I then marked each bunk all the way across. That first mark is all you need. That gives you your reference, and then you measure up each one, say 16 inches to the next bunk, and you'll be even all the way across. And when you're done, you'll be able to look down your bunks and you'll see they're all nicely in a plane. You don't have any that are sticking up or down from the rest of them. But in this case, seeing how we are better than 1/8 of an inch, we're going to pre-assemble them, and that'll just make things a little bit easier. Okay, let's get our preliminary layout done on this first one, and if this works out, then we will use this as a template for the rest of them. So I know from the past, roughly 16 to 20 inches is the dimensions I want for the height of each bunk. And we're going to end up with 5 sections here, so 4 dividers. And let's just sort of see what we have to work with. So one way of figuring out our layout, so we can look at our total number here. We got 87 inches. We have 5 bunks, so we're going to divide that by 5. We end up with 17.5 inches. And then we have to keep in mind that each bunk is going to take up 3 inches of space, even though each bracket is 4 inches tall, because we cut the bunks down. So of that 17.5 inches, what we really have is about 14.5 inches of room per bunk. So we take that 14.5 inches, and what we're going to do is we're going to shrink the top bunk a little bit, because the higher we go up, the more leverage it has to try to rip this thing off the wall. So we're going to round up a little and say we have 15 inches spacing in between our bunks. We have 3-inch tall bunks. That gives us a total of 18 inches. Every 18 inches up, we're going to make a mark. At that point, that is then going to give us our reference for the top of each bunk that'll be attached. Now we have to keep in mind our plates are 4 inches tall. Our bunks are only 3. So what we're laying out right now is going to be for our bunk top, which is also matching our plate top. The plate extends on the bottom end, not the top end, so that makes that pretty easy. Alright, I'm now going to transfer these marks over to the rest of them, and instead of measuring, I am just going to set all these up here, draw across them. Then even if I'm off a little bit on one of the measurements, it really doesn't matter. As long as they're all the same, that's what matters more than anything else. Alright, talking about hardware to put this together. None of this uses any special hardware. There's no structural screws involved. These are all 1 3/4 long number 8 screws. These particular ones are a good quality screw. They are made by Robertson, original Robertson brand. And I've not ever had issues with these. Some of the other ones I have had a little more snapping or breakage tendencies. So I definitely wouldn't use a cheap screw like the Paulins from Home Depot or something like that. That may be an issue. Definitely don't use something like a drywall screw, which is much easier to snap. For attaching each of our plates to these uprights, we're going to use new screws. I'm not going to reuse the old ones in that application because they've already been stressed once. And this is a situation where we don't want to have a chance having more than one screw fail at a time. Some of these, when I pulled them off, the odd one had failed, but there's 8 per pair of plates. So if one fails, you still have 7. I didn't notice any issues and nothing looked like it was bent out of place. But I don't want to push our luck any, and I know reusing screws, sometimes they will start to snap a lot quicker. The most important thing when you're fitting these up, aside from making sure they stay square, is that there is no gap whatsoever in between the bunk and the upright. Having a very tight fit up in there is where this gets most of its strength. We're going to put one in, and then we want to check for square. Once again, it really doesn't matter if these bunks are a little out of square, but they have to be even and consistent with each other. You can see here we have a tight fit up. That's what we're looking for. We don't want slop in either these side plates or in this cut on the bunk here. If these are all tight, your bunks will be strong. Alright, well, one's done, 4 more to go. Really doesn't take that long. And then it'll be time to mount these things. Well, good morning, friends. We've got the 5 lumber racks all put together. I double checked them, and it's a good thing I did. I completely missed one side on 2 separate bunks, so that definitely would have been bad. So in the past, what I've done to anchor these is I've used a 3/8 lag bolt, 6 inches long, and most important is that you have a washer on the end to prevent pull through. And what I've done is simply just lag these right through into the stud framing in the wall. When I was building this wall, I did lay it out to allow me to anchor these bunks well. But what I didn't take into account and didn't really know I was going to do at the time was have 1 inch thick MDF here on this sheathing this wall here, sort of acting as that makeshift shear panel. So because of the added thickness of that, the center of our stud framing is right on the edge of this wall. And as such, there's no way that I'm going to get a proper bite with a 3/8 lag bolt. It's going to go back there, and if anything, it's just going to try to splinter it. So to deal with this, I got some standard structural screws here that I'm going to use, and I'm just going to drive one of these in through the side of each bunk into the framing member on this wall. This is a very stout little wall, even though it has a door opening in it, so I'm not concerned that it's going to go anywhere. And these screws, with the clamping force they're going to provide, is going to carry the bulk of the weight for these bunks. And between that and then having the post on the back, this end bunk will be fine. So as a general rule, I pre-drill for lag bolts. Rule of thumb that I've gone by that has always worked well for me is to pre-drill with 1/3 of the diameter. So the first thing we have to do, and the most important thing, is we have to find the dead center of each of these studs. And we're going to drop some lines down just so that we make sure that our alignment of these bunks is directly on the studs. We really don't want to hit a stud in the back on the outside edge of the stud. This would still drive in, the lag bolt would drive in, it would feel tight, but it certainly would not have its holding power if it sort of only just splintered or glanced off the side. Okay, this is our center line. This is a 3/4 inch line off the side. Simply gives us a reference point so that we can actually have a visual line that we're going to see. Okay, don't bother trying to line the entire thing up right now. That's just a waste of time. Start off with the top or bottom. Leg bolt in. Now just kick this over to where it's supposed to be. Our top is nailed, so we know it's going to stay in alignment. Okay, and then we finish our top up. Okay, now that we're done the noisy bits. So the next thing we have to do is we just have to hand check some of these bolts. I'm going to hand check probably about half a dozen of them. If they're all tight, I'm not going to worry about the rest. If I find any that are not fully tightened, then we will go and just hand torque the rest of these. In an application like this, it's really important that we don't have a couple bolts that aren't driven all the way home. So they shouldn't be any issues, but you never really know whether or not, it's possible that you could hit a knot in the stud behind and it could torque out on the impact and you think it's in, and really there's still a bit of room to go. So this is just a little extra insurance. Yeah, so I'm confident that these are all driven home. There's a bit of redundancy built into this, so if one of these lag bolts were to fail or not be holding for some reason, the other 4 should take care of it. But of course we try not to rely on that. So the last thing we have to do is we're going to have to level up these bunks. No matter how careful we are with a square, unless we start putting some nice joinery in here, there is always the possibility that some of these are out of plane. In fact, I would almost bet on it. So let's take a look, see how we did, and make any adjustments that we have to. Okay, these have been all leveled up and installed. The last thing we need to do is we need to add another bunk. I'll probably add a couple just out here, and that's going to accommodate some of our longer stock. I just looked back in my storage and I thought the majority of it was 8 foot, but I do have some 9s in there, and that's going to be just too long overhanging off this edge here, and that'll be like 2.5 feet floating in air. So we're going to give it a little bit of a support. We'll get it put together, paint it up, and we should be good to start moving some wood in. This is after the fact, and so the machinery of course is no longer set up to do it in a batch run, but that's fine. We will just borrow this as a little bit of a template. Angle cut, still enough bearing. Good stuff. One of the things that I'm finding is taking a little bit of brain power is trying to actually figure out the sort on this bunk. In the past I had considerably more bunks, so it was very easy to put very nice and wide boards on one, put other stuff that's going to be cabinet door stock on another bunk, and I'm just trying to make sure now that when I place things like a wide board like this in place, that it doesn't end up at the bottom of a pile that I might need later, or vice versa. So I don't know. We might do a little bit of changing around back and forth here, but we'll see. We'll give her a go. Actually, I guess because this thing's 10 feet long, my 10s are going to have to sit on the bottom. Yeah, I think for the time being, we just put this over on the side. I think that bunk will be our 8-foot Eastern stock. I probably want to keep like a Western maple, maybe a poplar, birch, maybe in this bunk. It's probably the one I'm going to be going to the most. This is short bunk and this full length bunk probably. Maybe I'll put all the exotic stuff and the extra wide boards on the floor. That should probably work out. Debating or deciding whether or not I wanted to give up the 24 inches of bunk space that I have here to store lumber inside was a little bit of a back and forth. I mean, it does eat up a very sizable portion of the shop, but at least here we have some extremes in terms of weather. We have lots of wet weather. We get some pretty cold. You know, we get, typically most years we'll get down to maybe -10 before wind chill. We'll get up into the 30s during most summers for short periods of time. And couple that with the humidity that we usually get, it can wreak a bit of havoc on the woodworker who's trying to deal with boards that are changing due to the humidity and thermal stability. So all that to say that I'm glad that I did decide to put these in here. You know, I mean, we can always take them out later if for some reason we find we really need the space, but I think we'll be fine. You know, this is going to be my secondary bench back here. My primary bench is going to be further up front where there's more space, and I think it'll be nice. I think it'll work out just fine. This stuff's a little gnarly. It's that's a big ugly looking spider. Stickers, not just for drying wood. Okay. This is some Western maple. I got a few pieces that I milled. Honestly, I'm not sure. I might just end up giving this stuff away. I might find a use for it. It's got spalting in it and it looks pretty neat. But okay, we've got a bunch of stickers down here, and I got some nice maple, but it definitely got wet. I didn't realize the storage area these were in was actually leaking some water in on the one end, so it remains to be seen what ends up happening to these pieces. So we'll keep them stickered. We'll let some air through. We'll know in a few weeks' time whether or not these things flatten out a little bit, or they're still probably salvageable. But that's a $25 board right there, that one board, so it's worth our time. This board was directly below that first one. It fared a lot better. It's got some staining on the end, but I think overall it'll come back. It'll be fine, just fine. Although this cherry fared better than that maple, I think we'll sticker that as well. And there's enough money there in that wood that we don't want to risk messing it up. Okay, well, for the time being, that's going to be our lumber rack complete. Once some of this stuff has had a chance to dry out, we'll pull the stickers. We might sort of rearrange some things then. But for the time being, this is good. We got most of our lumber in here, and we got all our fancy stuff, our walnut, mahogany, and wide plank, maple down at the bottom. Got our Eastern hard rock maple there. This is a whole mix of stuff. We got cherry and cedar and fir, some live edge spalted maple, some more short pieces, and then we have all of our furniture grade pine up at the top. So that should be good. I've already hit these lights a couple times real hard in this process. Oops. Okay, that just saved a light bulb. So I am glad to have put these cages up on here. I think a couple of them have already paid for themselves and not having to replace light bulbs. So yeah, thanks for hanging out with us. And Finn and I appreciate it. We definitely read all the comments. Isn't that right, Finn? Alright guys, you have yourself a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Say goodbye to the people. Hi. We need to have you in the shot too? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, you're very muddy. You're. Mm-hmm. There's actually some nice figure in this up here. I don't know, Finn. I don't know.